This week on What Do You Got? Sally Clark and the Law.
Ooh.
It's a dark one.
Okay. Stay tuned.
Dark.
You're listening to Bro Down Podcast all fucking day. Oh, yeah.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Bro Down Podcast. I'm Tim Fulton.
I'm Eddie Smith.
And this is What Do You Got? A little segment where we come to the table with a topic that the other guy doesn't know about. And I generally have no idea what this is about. Andy, what do you got?
Sally Clark
Sounds like a bitch.
and the Law. Oh,
I'm probably going to regret that in a minute.
Right. So,
Who is this Sally?
I went down a YouTube rabbit hole
Okay.
today. And I was watching a video on... they do those Vice things where they ask an expert, ask an actor to break things down. And the one thing he was breaking down, the guy was a statistician?
Statistician?
Sounds weird when I say it. And he brought up a subject to make a point in his little thing that had, like, you would never think that it would relate to it. And I was like, what is that about? So I looked that up. And granted, my research went as far as Wikipedia. So
Fair enough.
I say research in air quotes. But it got me thinking. And with all the stuff in the news with Amber Heard lately and, like, the court case of, like, you know, he said, she said, it relates to the topic, and it's about how lawyers present information.
Okay.
And basically what I'm going to kind of get around to is, should they be allowed to present things in a court case that they know is inaccurate and being misrepresented?
Okay.
You'll see why when I'm going through this, but basically, they're there to win a case, and they have to defend their party. And the other thing that it's going to get around to is when a prosecutor is prosecuting somebody, they're basically going for conviction rate. Like, it's like a known thing that, like, people have tried other people that they kind of know are innocent, but they've already gone this far. And they're just trying to win now. So, like, the moral obligation to, like, once you find out that the person isn't guilty, that you're trying to prosecute, like, why aren't they just like, all right, we fucked up? Like,
Yeah.
And it's just, like, kind of society in a sense needs to be like, kudos to them for admitting this. We don't need to now attack them for going after the person.
Yeah.
So, I'm just going to read you the story of Sally Clark, like the bullet points of it.
Okay.
And you'll see how this ties together as it goes down. I'm going to read it off the paper just so that you don't skip ahead, because I read at a 3rd grade level. And you read
Okay.
at a 9th grade level. So,
8th.
Sally Clark was found guilty of murdering her 2 infant sons.
Okay.
Clark's first son died in December 96, within a few weeks of his birth, and her second son died under similar circumstances in January of 98. So a month later, Clark was arrested and tried for both deaths.
Okay.
The defense argued that the children had died from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. So the way that this tied back in to the statistician is that the prosecutor had relied on a pediatrician professor, his testimony, who testified that the chance of 2 children of an affluent family, because they were a little upper class family, suffering from SIDS was 1 in 73 million.
Okay.
And he had arrived at that figure by squaring his estimate of a chance of 1 in 8,500 as an individual chance of SIDS in similar circumstances.
Okay.
So, to give you the setup of how this became, you know, a big deal, so to speak, was that the one baby had fallen unconscious after being put to bed and was declared dead after being transported to the hospital. The second baby was born 3 weeks premature, and he was also found dead 8 weeks after his birth. Both occasions, the woman, Sally Clark, was at home alone with the babies, and there was evidence of trauma, which could have been related to attempts to resuscitate them.
Okay.
Her husband was also arrested on suspicion of murdering their children along with her. on the advice of her lawyer, she refused to answer questions when they tried to ask her twice. Now, keep in mind, this is taking place in England.
Okay.
So the court system's a little different.
Yeah. All the fancy wigs and stuff.
Yeah. She was later charged with 2 counts of murder while the case against her husband was dropped. Her husband supported her
Was behind
her
her.
innocence the whole time. The involvement of the pediatrician Roy Meadow, former professor of pediatrics at the University of Leeds, who testified at Clark's trial that the chance of the 2 children from an affluent family suffering a SIDS death was 1 in 73 million. He linked this to the probability of the chances of backing an 80-1 outsider in the Grand National for years running. So he's presenting this case to the jury with stats.
Yeah.
Okay. So Clark was convicted in a 10-1 majority verdict in 1999, November 9th, and given the mandatory sentence of life in prison. Despite recognitions of the flaws in Meadows' statistical evidence, the convictions were upheld in an appeal in October of 2000.
Okay.
I found it important to note that the nature of her conviction as a child killer and her background as a solicitor, I don't know why that matters in prison. I didn't know that they hated solicitors. So, and she was also the daughter of a police officer, made her a target for other prisoners.
Okay.
The husband sold their house, left his law firm, and moved to closer to the prison to help her fight her case and with legal bills from the first trial and the appeal. Later, it came to light that the microbiological test showed that Harry had a colonization of a word I can't pronounce, bacteria, indicating that he had died from natural causes. But the evidence had not been disclosed to the defense. This exculpatory evidence had been known to the prosecution's pathologist, Adam Williams, since February of 98, but was not shared with other medical witnesses, police, or lawyers. Evidence shows what was unearthed by her husband, who, from hospital records, obtained it. So her husband was going through hospital records and just found this. And he was working with a divorce lawyer who provided her services to them free of charge because she was following the case and felt, in her words, that something was not right. It also became clear that this statistical evidence presented by at Clark's trial was seriously flawed. So they had another guy brought in for her second appeal, another pathologist out of Florida. And he commented, through my review, I was horrified at the shoddy fashion in which the case was evaluated. It was clear that some medical principles were abandoned in favor of oversimplification, overinterpretation, exclusion of relevant data, and in several instances, the imagining of non-existent findings. She was released from prison after having served more than 3 years after she won the second appeal. So this case became huge because the reason why she was convicted was basically heavily influenced on the lawyer presenting statistics of how unlikely it was that 2 children of the same family, an affluent family, would die of SIDS. So statistical evidence, the first trial was widely criticized for the misrepresentation of statistical evidence, particularly by Meadow. He stated that in evidence as an expert witness that 1 sudden infant death in a family is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and 3 is murder unless proven otherwise. It actually became known as Meadow's Law after that.
Oh.
He claimed that for an affluent, non-smoking family like the Clarks, the probability of a single death from SIDS was 1 in 8,543. So the probability of 2 of the same family was around 1 in 73 million. Given that there were around 700 live births in Britain each year, Meadow argued that the double SIDS death would be expected to occur once every 100 years. In October 2001, the Royal Statistical Society made a statement that there's no statistical bias for there was no statistical basis for the 1 in 73 million figure. And in January 2002, wrote to the Lord Chancellor pointing out that the calculation leading to the 1 in 73 million is false. So this guy was presenting statistics to the jury, and they were completely wrong.
Yeah.
But he was allowed to present them as fact. So the 1 in 73 million. So basically, the reason why this was so interesting to me was that lawyers are trying to, win their case.
Win their cases, yeah.
So this guy is presenting evidence in statistical form that he knows or is maybe just uneducated that is bullshit. And the fact that it was under scrutiny, but nobody flat out came out and said, can we actually get the numbers? And if we actually get the numbers and prove that it's not 1 in 73 million, can we have that retracted from this court case?
Yeah, yeah.
So to give you an example of how fucked up you can go with it, he was saying that the probability of an affluent family, where was I here? I was on this one, right?
Sure.
Okay, so in 2004, an article from the Pediatric Perennial Epidemiology, professor of mathematics Ray Hill of Stanford concluded that using an extensive SIDS statistic for England, after the first SIDS death, chances of a second death become greatly increased by a factor of 5 to 10.
That's interesting.
So not only
Was he probably wrong about the initial one?
but if you've had a baby that was died from SIDS, your likelihood of having it happen again increase, not decrease.
Yeah.
So he was saying that the 1 in 73 million figure was valid and should not have been interpreted as the probability of Clark's innocence. So he was portraying it as she has a 1 in 73 million chance of being innocent because it's a 1 in 73 million chance that this could happen.
Yeah, he was basically. Yeah, so it sounds like the defense said this is what actually happened, and they brought upon the statistician to say that is all but impossible.
Yeah. Yes. So in order to calculate the probability of Clark's innocence, the jury needed to weigh upon the relative likelihood that two competing explanations for the children's death. In other words, murder was not the only alternative explanation for the death. And that the way, in that way, one might have inferred from asserted probability of the double SIDS. Although double SIDS is very rare, double infant murder is likely to be still rarer. So the probability of Clark's innocence was quite high. He calculated the odds ratio for double SIDS to double homicide between 4.5 to 1 and 9 to 1. So what he was saying was the statistics they presented of the likelihood that she murdered the kids because the 1 in 73 million deaths was so unlikely. He was like, but the likelihood of a double murder of a woman doing it to her own children is 1 in 9, or like a 9 to 1 ratio. The likelihood of the SIDS is half that. So it's more likely that you're going to have two children die of SIDS than you're going to have a woman murder
Both of her children.
So he's basically saying that the statistics are being very skewed. So, basically, this lady had her life ruined, right? She had two children die.
Yeah, yeah. To
Right?
start things off.
Yeah. Right? So this is what happened to her. The nature of Sally Clark's wrongful conviction as a child killer and her background as a solicitor and daughter police officer made her a target for prisoners. According to her family, Clark was unable to recover from the effects of her conviction and imprisonment. After her release, her husband said she would never be well again. A family spokesman stated that Sally was unable to come to terms with the false accusations based on a flawed medical evidence and the failures of the legal system, which debased everything she had been brought up to believe in, which she herself practiced. It was stated that in later inquests that she was diagnosed with a number of severe psychiatric problems. These problems included enduring personality change after catastrophic experience, protracted grief reaction, and alcoholic dependency syndrome. Clark was found dead in her home in Essex on March 6, 2007. It was originally thought that she had died of natural causes, but an inquest ruled that she had died from acute alcohol intoxication.
She literally drank herself to death.
She drank herself to death. Now, there was a term used in here called the prosecutor's fallacy.
Okay.
So basically, this woman didn't do this, and she was released after serving time in prison. So she had both of her kids died. Then she was convicted of murdering them when she didn't, and then she drank herself into an early grave.
Yep.
So the prosecutor's fallacy is a fallacy of statistical reasoning involving a test for an occurrence, such as a DNA match. A positive result in a test may paradoxically be more likely to be an erroneous result than an actual occurrence, and even if the test is very accurate. The fallacy is named because it's typically used by prosecutors to exaggerate the probability of a criminal defendant's guilt. The fallacy can be used to support other claims as well, including the innocence of a defendant. So I didn't know what the fuck that meant when I read it.
I don't either. That was
so they gave an
wordy
example
nonsense.
here, and this kind of sums up everything I just went over. This was the best way that I figured out how to understand it. For instance, if a perpetrator were known to have the same blood type as a given defendant, and 10% of the population was to share that blood type, then one version of the prosecutor's fallacy would be to claim that on the basis alone, the probability that the defendant is guilty is 90%. So they're saying if you have type A blood and only 10% of the people that live around you or on the planet, let's say,
have type A blood.
Have type A blood, then that means that they're saying 90% of the people don't have type A blood. You and the person they arrested have type A blood. So there's a 90% chance that you're guilty because you're only part of the 10%. So that's how they present the evidence.
Yeah.
However, this conclusion is only a close to correct if the defendant was selected at the main suspect based on robust evidence discovered prior to the blood test and unrelated to it. The blood match may then be an unexpected coincidence. Otherwise, the reasoning presented is flawed and is overlooked as the higher priority probability. So this is the better example that using the same statistics. Assume, for instance, that 1,000 people live in a town where the murder occurred. Only 1,000. This means that 100 people who live there have this perpetrator's blood type and the victim's blood type. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the probability the defendant is guilty based on the fact that his blood type matches the killer is only 1%, which is far less than 90. So basically what they're saying is the prosecutor will present that as 90% probability that you're guilty because you're part of this small group. But they're saying out of 100 people that have type A, there's 100 other people with type A. So you're one of 100. Yeah. So you actually only have a 1% chance statistically that you're the killer because you share that blood type with 100 other people.
Yeah.
And that made me think about what I talked about in the beginning, which was I understand that people have a requirement to defend and prosecute. That's their job. But that to me is knowing you're presenting evidence in a way that is false.
Yeah.
It's almost like a weird way of lying.
It is almost like a weird way of lying. So it's like, I don't even know how to accurately describe how I feel about all this, but like, so to me, there's two different levels to this, right? So it sounds like in, what the hell's her name? Sally Clark's case, the prosecutors at a certain point probably realized she was innocent. If they had medical evidence that the first child died from natural disease, then A, your statistics are all wrong, but B, you at the very least shouldn't be trying her for 2 homicides. It should be 1 homicide, if any at all. So they knowingly continued the prosecution. That just is blatantly dumb. Like, I understand prosecution rates, blah, 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 but someone somewhere has to have some like semblance of like...
It's almost like the statistics kind of get thrown out because you said that the first child died of natural causes. And then the second thing, which is an unrelated to the prosecutor's fallacy part, but that evidence was withheld.
Yeah,
that prove that the
exactly.
second child died of natural causes.
Yeah.
And that's not linked to that, but it goes into the whole like flawed part of the system where, like you said, if you were prosecuting somebody and you think that you have the right person, like they legitimately think like, hey, we have the right person enough to we're going to charge them. But then halfway through the case, you realize it's probably not them. Should there be a open discussion about like allowing the prosecution to relinquish the case and not get hung out to dry of like, you're putting innocent people, like in my head, when I'm thinking about this, it should be accepted that if they find out that, hey, we got the wrong guy, we thought we had the right guy, but we have the wrong guy, and we're going to stop the case halfway through because of this.
Yeah.
And we're going to admit that we had it wrong. And for them to be more so, not, I guess, applauded for that, as opposed to attacked for getting the wrong person, because I think it's the fact that they are attacked so much for that, and they also want the high conviction rate because they're lawyers. They want to have a good reputation. That's part of the reason why they don't do that, because they don't want to look like fools. So they would, as a group, they're like, we're going to put an innocent person in jail if we can so that we don't look like we're fuck-ups.
Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah. But like, what do you, and I don't know how I feel about it. Like I said, I just saw this today, but the presenting of evidence in a manner that you know is deceiving when you're trying to put someone in prison. Like I can almost understand if you're trying to prove your innocence, you got to do whatever you can to that point. But as the prosecutor, you're representing the law. You're supposed to be the end all be all of justice. And you're presenting evidence that you know is fucked up. Like it's like almost like you're planting, not drugs, but like you're planting this piece of evidence there that makes it more likely. It's not fully incriminating, but you're planting evidence that's making people think that you're more guilty than you are.
Yeah. I don't know.
I almost look at this the same way if you're going over like blood splatter patterns and somebody's like misleadingly explaining how the blood splatter patterns had to have come from where the fucking person that's on trial is sitting at the time of the murder.
Yeah.
And
then they're like, oh no, it could be a couple of different angles.
Yeah, where it's like, well, actually, there was only like a 10% chance of that person sitting there, where there was like a way better chance, but they present it as like, yeah, that's where the blood would have gone. But they're refusing to say that the likelihood of it going there is very small.
Yeah.
So, and they basically killed this woman. Yeah. I look at this as they killed her.
Yeah, I agree with you on that 100%. And the icky part, but the icky part to me is the whole point of getting a statistician like that on there is that they're supposed to be the
non-bias.
A, they're supposed to be non-biased, and B, they're supposed to be the expert. So like when you say, let's take a look at the numbers XYZ, he is supposed to be the numbers because he's not supposed to be biased. So you have an expert on the stand. I mean, I get all my shit from TV and whatnot, but like I would assume that the defense could have probably brought in their own expert who probably could have gone against that.
Yeah, from how it sounded, there was a lot of questions about the stats during the case, so I'm sure that they did.
Okay,
but the fact that it was allowed to stay, after that, like I almost feel like the judge should have brought in his own experts. Or I don't think you can do that, but almost brought in like a team of people and been like, how would you do this statistic? Because it's a weird statistic. It's a multi-layered statistic. And the one thing that they went in there, which I couldn't find, I didn't want to just babble through it, but they went into the fact that because they were an affluent family that higher income, because they were non-smokers, and because of a couple other factors, they basically said that it's even more unlikely that they would have had 2 babies that died of SIDS. But what the statistician brought up that reviewed that, the guy from Florida, said, yeah, but those are also the same exact factors which make them less likely to have committed the murder.
Yeah.
So you're using the same facts to say like, yeah, I'm right, but it's like, yeah, but you're also increasing the line of the likelihood that they murdered them, but you're leaving those out. And that's where I get like weird with the prosecution end, because you're not really arguing evidence of like, no, this is why they this is why they did it. You're arguing some bullshit that you know is kind of bullshit just because you want to get a conviction.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I don't know if it should be allowed, because then you got to think like, what is that? What are the implications of that? Like, do you like allow one party to argue a certain way and not the other party?
See, I get weird about that too, because you can't have prosecutors the entire time be like, this is what could have happened, but they could have gone the other way too. Like,
I guess, yeah. I guess
I don't know.
I guess for how I'm reading it, the more so is the fact that they knew that the stats were bullshit because they were called on it.
Yeah.
And it's like they still kept with the 1 in 73 million when they were like, no, like that's not what, like even by your math, the math that you're doing is wrong.
Yeah. The math
like you're
wrong.
adding wrong.
Yeah.
You're doing the equation wrong.
Yeah.
Like the way you're presenting it is mathematically not correct. But they were still allowed to put it in.
It's crazy. That's the part that gets me more than anything else.
Yeah.
That they knew it was wrong.
Yeah.
They know that those numbers don't make sense.
Exactly. Like with all the Amber Heard thing in the news with the Johnny Depp, that's a very he said, she said, and they have a lot of evidence with like the phone calls and this and that. And it just like made me kind of like depressed about how like ugly that like the courtroom is.
Yeah.
When there's no friends in there. Like none. And just listening to each side in that case, like even when they're like whatever your feelings are, whether Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Johnny's not the giant monster that not everyone, but a lot of people thought he was, which is why he got kicked off all the movies. But like just hearing how like the defendants, lawyers, and everything talk to the people on the stand sometimes, like the nastiness level of it, and the trying to get people riled up to make a mistake, like it's like a game. It's like I understand you're trying to catch people in a lie. It's just it seems like it could be done in a better way, but I don't know the better way.
I don't know the better way, dude. I was I mean, this only relates a little bit, but I was in a jury once upon a time. And did I ever tell you that?
Yeah, I think you did actually.
It was robbery at knife point. They robbed the Dunkin' Donuts, and they got away with no money, and they got arrested.
So they didn't rob it.
Yeah,
Attempted.
They attempted robbery.
So they're bad at it.
Yeah, they were very, very bad at it. But there's this whole thing about a jacket. Who was wearing the jacket? Because
you did tell me about this, but I don't remember. So go ahead.
So they had the whole thing on video, but it's a Dunkin' Donuts surveillance camera from like 15 years ago. How old am I? Yeah, it was probably at least 10 years ago. So it was not the greatest quality. There's two guys. And the argument was who was wearing the red jacket, because the red jacket guy was the guy who pulled the knife. So that was the whole argument. And it was honestly one of the silliest things I've ever seen in my entire life, because the defense attorney never said anything. He never called any witnesses. At the end, his whole closing statement was, my client isn't that black guy in the video. He's the other black guy in the video. And we're all like, oh.
That's
no,
a
he's
public
not.
Defender.
Yeah. But so they literally had this woman come onto the stand, and they had her give statistics on, she took DNA samples from the jacket because they found it tossed in the bushes afterwards. And she's like, we found 3 different types of DNA on there. This is the person who likely would have owned it. This is the other 2 would have been wearing it at some point. And it was this whole like nonsense. And at the end of it, like everyone, it was so convoluted that when we finally got to talking about it, because we did a good job as a jury, we didn't discuss the thing at all. We were dying to. It's the one thing that all 8 of us have in common. 10 of us, if you include the 2 backups. And we're not allowed to talk about it. So finally we get to talk about it. And someone was like, so what the fuck was that with the jacket? We didn't even know. We were like, what were they even talking about? Oh, the other guy was wearing... wait, who was wearing it? And by the time we were allowed to talk about it, we're just like, we
Yeah.
were so lost with like the whole thing.
Yeah.
It made no sense.
Yeah, that's...
It was weird. We convicted the guy. Just for
We
that.
convicted the guy.
I tried to look up how long he got, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, it's I don't know how... I think the lady with the DNA, right? The way that she presented the facts of like, this is the person that most likely wore it, because when we examine jackets for DNA, the DNA left by the person who wore it are normally in these spots.
Yeah.
And that's where the highest concentration of the DNA was. So in my opinion, this is most likely the person that did it. Now, if she started saying like, there's a 1 in 10 chance, like that's when you're like, well, are you a statistician? How do you know that?
Yeah.
Like the guy that was in this case that was giving those numbers wasn't a statistician. He was a pediatric doctor. So in my head, now that I'm thinking about it, like his statistics alone are not his expertise. Like if you do research on something that has nothing to do with statistics, you would have to, if you wanted to be like, I need, my life depends on these numbers being right. Wouldn't you get a statistician to do the calculations for you so that you didn't fall into some weird loophole where like you didn't take something into account that you didn't realize needed to be taken into account because you're not a statistician?
Or at least confirm the numbers, yeah.
Yeah, you're like a pediatric doctor. Like any idiot like me would look at that and be like, well, yeah, because the chances of one happening are this, the chance of two happening are that, because that's how stats work. A statistician is like, yeah, but you're falling into a common misconception where this equals this, but because of this factor, it actually reduces it. And you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would at least want some sort of confirmation, some sort of second person to look at it and either see if they get the same number as you or they don't get the same number as you.
Especially when somebody's life is on the line.
Yeah. Dude, I had to run payroll for this guy. Literally had to figure out what his paycheck would look like week for week. And I had someone double check it because I wasn't confident that my numbers were right. They ended up being right because I'm the fucking best.
Yeah, you're a statistician.
I'm a statistician. But, I mean, if I'm doing that just over some guy's $500 paycheck,
yeah,
sure as shit gonna do it when a woman's fucking life is on the line.
Yeah.
If they're trying to convict her for a murder of 2 children.
And that's the other point, too, is that the jury is just regular people.
Yeah.
So the guy the reason why I went down this rabbit hole, that video I was watching, was a statistician who was being asked questions via Twitter.
Yeah.
And one of the questions was like, well, isn't everything just a 50-50 chance? Because there's the philosophy of like everything's just a 50-50 chance. And he started going into this case, explaining how like it looks at face value like you can do stats very simply, but then he brought up, like, I think he actually used the prosecutor's fallacy in his terminology, but he was saying like it's not that. Like you have to be very careful when you're doing this. And this case brought up like a big I guess shed a lot of light into like that kind of stuff, like the whole thing with what do they call it? Witnesses, first person. What is it? The eyewitnesses. Mm-hmm. Like they used to be the end all be all when it came to convictions of murder and all this stuff. And then they find out that they're actually highly unreliable.
Highly unreliable.
Like very, very unreliable. And my thing is like, if you convict people based on firsthand witnesses, and then now you have cases where you don't allow them because they're so unreliable, like statistically, shouldn't you go back
and at least review
to all those cases? I know it's a lot of red tape and money, but like there's probably people that are in jail who are like, I didn't do that, and you convicted me based off of firsthand account or whatever. Like that's my problem with it. Like people getting, like if you got caught with a bag of weed yesterday and then they make it totally legal, like you could smoke it on the front lawn of the police station the next day, but then you have to serve 5 years because you got arrested a day before they made it legal. That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. Although New York is doing something cool. So New York, it's legal in New York now. They're a little bit behind Jersey, where they're just starting now to set up shops and all that stuff.
Yeah.
They're doing the government is doing a program to help new people set up these pot shops, basically. And to qualify, you had to have had a pot-related bust in your thing. So if you got busted for pot once upon a time in the state of New York, you now can sign up for a program which will help you set up a store to legally sell marijuana.
I have a very, very skeptical mind the older I get when it comes to the government helping people. Now, I know that it sounds like a really good thing. In my head, in the words of Ronald Reagan, I think it's the 9 scariest words you can ever hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So the first thing I think of with something like that is, what are they getting out of this? What is their goal? Is it votes? Okay, it's votes. But there's a lot of times where like the government just doesn't spend money on stuff to spend money on stuff without an agenda.
You're too
I'm not, though. I don't think that I am in this case. I really don't think that I would normally agree with you because I'm not the smartest, crayon in the shed.
I mean, so if everything has a thing like that, I was just listening to a report. We're getting really off.
That's okay.
Rabbit holes. I was just listening to a report from on NPR. They were talking about Philadelphia, but it applies to everywhere in the United States. They just use Philly as an example, about people who would normally qualify for state and federally run programs to make homes more energy efficient. Basically, if you're under a certain poverty level, you can go to this program, say, I need new windows. They'll put in new windows as long as it will increase the energy efficiency of your home. So what's the point of that? What are they getting out of it?
See, this is...
Buy bugs?
No. See, this is where...
Mind control?
No. This is where you have to think...
They automatically lock the windows so you can't escape?
See, I'll let you keep going because I already have an answer.
Shoot.
Okay. So what people don't realize, and I understand why, but if you think of 40 years ago, Goodfellas times, right?
Okay.
People, like New York, mobbed up politicians, union workers, everything. If there's money to be made, and I know like the Italian mafia is not like in the stronghold powerhouse that it used to be, but if there's money to be made, it's there. Like people still sell drugs, people still bring in weapons to the country. Mm-hmm. They do everything. They smuggle human beings. Okay, yep. So to think that like somebody doesn't have a hand in the cookie jar with anything, something like that, it could be totally vanilla. It could be, but when I think about how the government works as far as like what gets approved, who's approving money, you have to have a better reason than everybody else. So that could be as simple as something like, hey, so-and-so's buddy owns a fucking window manufacturing company, and I'm getting a piece of this, and I'm the person that signs this off. Like, you looking at me like I'm nuts, and it could be the fact that it is totally vanilla, and there's nothing wrong with it. But things like that go through all the time, and they seem so ridiculous, which is the beauty of it. Because people think like, that's so ridiculous, like nobody would do that. But they do.
You're too whatchamacallit for me.
I can't say skeptical. A lot of the things
You're
that
too
I'm
skeptical for me.
Yeah, I can't say a lot of the things that I'm thinking about. I'll tell you later. But I guess what I'm saying is that in the giant budget of government, like when we were, for instance, when Chris Christie was in the governor of New Jersey, mm-hmm. Why would he take $60 million out of a pension fund for workers that work for the government and give it to build casinos in Atlantic City? Like, just as a regular human being, like, where do you fall upon that decision?
Well, it was. I'm not really sure what you're trying to ask me.
What I'm saying is that was that the only option to do with the money? You don't have to use the money. It's in a pension.
He legally couldn't use the money. It was illegal what he did, just for the record.
Yeah, but what I'm saying,
It's not his money. It's the people who it's
So
it's
even-
a pension plan.
so even
It's,
better.
what he did was illegal.
so even better, what he did was illegal. Why would you do something illegal just because it's best for the state of New Jersey people? Do you see where the incentive of I want to get this pushed through to go to casinos? Like, I don't know what the particulars of incentives are, but you see what my point is of okay, we're going to spend $60 million. What other things could we have done with that money? A million different things. But we decided to build casinos in a city that has already a bunch of casinos. But that's what we're doing with the money. Like, the decision of doing that just on paper is a little fishy.
I agree it's a little fishy, but I'm going to say that I don't think that there's a 0% chance, statisticians, 0% chance that Chris Christie wasn't doing it for the benefit of New Jersey. Illegal, yes, don't get me wrong. And in the long run, long scheme of things, terrible decision. Even if it was legal, terrible decision. Because look at Atlantic City right now. It's still in completely disheveled. But I'm saying that it's not a 0% chance that Chris Christie was saying to himself, we need to make New Jersey better. We need more revenue income. The revenue income comes from outside of New Jersey, people coming into our state for casinos, huge draw, and we're starting to get competition. We're getting competition in Pennsylvania. We're getting competition in New York. So we want to make these huge draws. If we build up our casinos, we're going to keep those revenue streams coming. Is that possible?
100%. It's 100% possible.
Yes.
The way that I look at it is not in absolutes, which is why I say, like, I know it sounds crazy, but what I'm saying is I don't think that either one is ever fully applicable on that scale. Because you can even go down to, it could even be something as simple as, people that donated to his campaign might have ties with Atlantic City casinos. And they're like, hey, dude, we're going to support you next campaign. But my town's kind of hurting and my casino needs a revamp, or this other casino's killing me. Like, you can't obviously, like, give the money. Like, I don't have $60 million, but I have $20 million to give to you for your next campaign, and you can't use the casino money for your campaign. So put the pension money in there and I'll fund your next campaign. It could be something as simple as that. There's 1,000 different ways to wash money, right? Like, the cost of building a home is never really the cost of building a home.
Yeah.
So I just get suspicious the more I see things, and like the absolute like waste of how well-oiled machine that every government is. So when people make these big decisions, or these decisions to just, like, out of the good of our hearts, we just want to help people that we've put in prison for the last X amount of years, and we're still working out the kinks. So we're now going to do and help out the people that got convicted of drug offenses. Like, it's almost like, excuse me for being a little suspicious. I don't know what the suspicion comes from. It just makes the spidey sense go, like, I don't know what's going on here, and I'll never know, but I feel like this isn't all authentic.
Yeah.
I'm not like tinfoil hat conspiracy guy, but
there's two ways I look at that. On the one hand, part of me thinks healthy skepticism is good for everything. You shouldn't take everything with
grain of salt.
Grain of salt. I feel like it's the reverse. You take everything with a grain of salt means you're susceptible, whatever. So on one side, I think healthy skepticism, but on the other side, I think, well, you don't know what's wrong, but you don't like it anyway.
Yeah, but that's my point, which is why I say I'm never fully in one boat. Like, I'm not the guy. Like, there's people that are like, a lot of people that are like really into conspiracies. They look at that and they go like, well, we don't want it because they're doing something and we don't know what it is, but we don't want it because they want it. I'm not doing that. The only thing I'm saying is this might be a good thing. It might work out more so in the benefit of the people that they're actually doing it for. I'm not saying that it's going to work out for them more. I'm saying that decisions to make giant piles of money move towards a certain thing usually have a benefit of both parties.
Fair.
And a lot of times I think that the benefit that it's giving to the party that's making the decisions is not presented in a very see-through way.
Believe me, it's funny that we're having the argument in this direction because at the end of the day, we've never really talked politics too heavily on the show. But at the end of the day, I'm a libertarian. So if anyone is skeptical of government spending, it's me. But in this instance, I liked it. But
no, I think we're saying the same thing to a certain extent.
To a certain extent.
But I just, I guess I'm just more, I don't want to say, I guess skeptical would be the thing, but more, I guess more questioning. Like, we were talking about before with the movies where you ever see a joke in a movie and you wonder where it came from. So, one of the things that I used to do all the time, which a lot of people I know do, is they hear facts when they're kids and they don't know where they got them from. Like we were talking about before, water snakes.
Yeah, so, I was just thinking that as you brought it up.
We were talking about with the water snakes. Yeah. We're like, oh, careful with the water snakes because they're all venomous. And we're like, are they? Or did our parents just say that? Yeah. I know I didn't read it in a book. I just heard it.
I heard it too.
But we all heard it. So there's a weird thing where I think that's called a political truth. It's not. It's basically you just say it enough, and then once people say it enough, people think it's real.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the few things I took away from college was that the one guy said something that really changed the way I thought about things, which was how did I come to know that? Now, you might think that you know something, but you don't know it. You just heard it.
Yeah.
So he was saying like Santa Claus, like little kids. Hopefully no one listens to this. How did you come?
This is the episode my nephew's going to watch.
Yeah. How did you come to know Santa Claus was real?
The episode about Sally Clark.
Yeah. And you're like, well, my friends told me about it. My parents told me about it. And then you're like, oh, that's as far as it goes. Have my parents ever lied to me? Well, yeah. So then they might be lying about this. So I guess that's where the skeptical thing comes in because there's so many times that the government has been caught doing things. People have been caught taking bribes and all this stuff. And really simple things. Yeah. Like simple things for like not that much money.
Yeah.
Like not a lot.
It's really kind of scary.
No, like one of my professors in college, one of his good friends was like a really, really high-end politician. And he was a politician in something to do with like he had the oversight for like certain construction projects or housing projects or something like that. And he took a bribe for $50,000. And it ended up being either an undercover guy or he got caught with it. And he goes, he was making X amount of money a year from his politician job and then wherever he was. He goes, he was making $300,000 a year. He goes, he'd take a job at McDonald's if you gave it to him right now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's how
terrifying.
Attractive money is to people sometimes, some people. So when I hear those things and I think like, oh, I wouldn't take the risk of doing that. But I'm like, but then again, a lot of people I know would.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I get more like, where's the benefit here? Like if it's like if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I'll give you this 100 for one of your dollars. Are you just going to, you as a person, are you just going to be like, sure? Are you going to have no questions?
Well, no, of course I'm going to have questions.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're not saying that the $100 bill isn't real. You're not saying that they're 100% trying to scam you. But you're like, this looks too good to be true. And why are you doing it now? Where were you the rest of my life? Why haven't you come up to me every day looking for this $1 for a $100 transfer?
Yeah.
That's what I said with the pot. I've had these people in prison for decades, and now you want to help them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you've had them in prison for decades.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is like, where's the all of a sudden switch?
Well, I will say that the whole pot thing has like really turned on its head within the past year. It's been absolutely crazy.
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do, nothing to do with politicians changing their mind. It has to do with the people that vote changing their mind and being louder about it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Also, too, biggest supporter of politicians opposed to marijuana law being legal? Prison unions.
Oh, yeah, that I believe. 100%.
Not because of their views on it, because
because,
most
yeah.
prisons in this country are private.
And you got to keep them filled.
And they get a lot of money for it.
Yep.
And speaking of New York wanting to lower the prisoner population, do you know that they just sold off a piece of Central Park to build a prison?
No, really?
Yeah.
That's
They
terrible.
I think it was Central Park. They commissioned it as state land, like park land, to build a prison on it. And they didn't tell anyone they were building a prison on it.
That's interesting.
They said they needed it for housing of prisoners. Yeah. So
That's interesting. The mayor of New York is currently a cop. Well, ex-cop.
yeah, it's weird. A lot
Yeah.
of weird stuff. Politician in general is like gotta watch out.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
There's the whole I can't get down this rabbit hole again.
No, this is the point of the rabbit hole.
I gotta pee, man.
Okay, we'll pick it up some other time. But yeah, so that's how I got on the Sally Clark thing, and that was a horrific case. It made me very sad because I went into this being like, oh my God, like I read it down. So when I saw she got appealed, I'm like, oh, she's out. And then it's like, oh, she couldn't help cope with it. I'm like, oh, she's probably all I'm like, oh, she died 20 years ago or 15 years ago. I'm like,
yeah.
holy shit. Yeah.
Literally killed herself with alcohol. Do you know how hard that is? How hard that is?
Dude, think about this. Neither one of us have kids. Imagine, I don't even want to say it, but say, okay, you don't have any sisters.
No.
Okay, so imagine you had two sisters and both of them were murdered within a year of each other. And then on top of that, you have people saying you did it.
Yeah.
Then they convict you of it. It's pretty clear during the case you didn't do it. Then you go to a prison where because your brother's a cop, you're dealing with all kinds of headaches. And then 3 years in, they're like, sorry, here's no money. Here's no nothing.
But good luck.
Enjoy the rest of life. And you're like, cool. I can't go back to my old job.
I'm literally crazy.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Real quick. We should talk about this next time. This should be the lead off. I'm going to write this down. We're done. The whole innocent till proven guilty thing does not exist in this country.
No,
anymore.
it doesn't. From a legal standpoint, purely legal standpoint, it does. But from a social standpoint, it 100% does not.
I honestly think that there should be a, and I've heard other people give this argument, but I'm not 100% I agree with it. If you're convicted of a crime, or if you're arrested for a crime, they shouldn't be able to put your name and picture in the paper until you're convicted.
I gotta pee. We gotta sign off.
Okay,
I know you hate me so much.
We'll pick up there. You know what you have to do? You have to do like the Rocky version of Rising from the Ashes for your bladder. Because right now you're fighting for $20 against Spider.
One day we're gonna make it, and we're gonna be like doing like press tours and shit, and we're gonna be on Joe Rogan's podcast, and we're like, dude, I'm sorry, I gotta go pee.
And I'm gonna be like, kick this bitch out. This bitch can't. No.
I'll wear a catheter for that one.
Yes, you will.
All right, guys, let us know what you think about the story in the comment section down below. What is going on with prosecutors? What would you do differently? What would you have them do differently? I know this is a very specific thing. But yeah, don't forget to go to brodownpro.com. We're coming out with new stuff all the time. We actually have new designs in the work right now. We'll see how long it takes for them to come out, Andy.
We go from that topic to buy some dinosaur t-shirts.
Hey, man, got to make money somehow.
Soulless plugs.
We'll catch you guys next time.
Later.
You're listening to Bro Down Podcast all